Welcome back to ABA Chapter Chat. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into something pretty fundamental in applied behavior analysis.
Okay.
The ABC model.
All right.
It's like the detective's toolkit for figuring out why people do what they do.
Yeah.
Which is obviously crucial for all of us working in ABA.
Yeah, you got it. The ABC model, sometimes called the three-term contingency, basically breaks down behavior into three parts. What happens before the behavior itself and what happens afterward.
Okay.
It's like a chain reaction, antecedent behavior consequence.
Okay. So let's unpack this. So if I'm trying to figure out why a client is, say, refusing to do their homework.
Right.
I need to look at what happened right before the refusal.
Yes.
And what happened right after.
Precisely. Think of it like this.
Okay.
Imagine you're trying to understand why employees in a workplace are always missing deadlines.
Okay.
Using the ABC model, you'd first look at the antecedents. What's happening before the missed deadlines? Maybe they're getting unclear instructions or they're swamped with too many tasks. Then you'd examine the consequences. What happens after they miss a deadline?
Okay.
Is there any accountability or does it just slide? This analysis helps you see the whole picture.
So it's like putting together a puzzle.
Exactly.
You need all the pieces to see the full picture.
Yep.
But you also mentioned something about discretionary behaviors. What are those?
Those are the actions that really make a company shine.
Okay.
They're the behaviors that go above and beyond the basic job requirements. Think of the employee who always helps their colleagues, even when it's not their job, or the one who's always coming up with creative solutions. They're the superstars.
The ones who make you think, wow, I wish everyone was like that. Now it's making me think about my own workplace.
Yeah.
What about you? Can you think of any examples of discretionary behaviors you've seen? What do you think might be driving those actions?
All the time. I think it's really interesting to try and understand what motivates those people to go above and beyond.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that both what happens before a behavior, the antecedents, and what happens after the consequence play a role in shaping behavior. Are they equally influential?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that too. What do you think?
Here's where things get really interesting. While those antecedents are important triggers, it's the consequences that really pack a punch in shaping behavior.
Okay.
They're like the fuel that keeps the engine running.
So just setting clear expectations isn't enough. You need to pay close attention to what happens after the behavior too, right?
Exactly. But here's the thing.
Okay.
So many companies get stuck focusing only on the antecedents. They invest tons of money in training programs, hold endless meetings, send memo after memo, all trying to change behavior. But if they don't address the consequences, it's like trying to build a house on sand.
It's like telling someone to hit a button but not actually connecting it to anything. They might press it a few times, but if nothing happens, they're going to stop.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And to make things even clearer, let's break down those consequences into two main types.
Okay.
Reinforcers, which increase a behavior, and punishers, which decrease it.
Okay. So kind of like a carrot and stick approach, but maybe a bit more nuanced?
Exactly. It's not about being harsh.
Yeah.
It's about understanding what drives behavior. Think of a snack machine.
Okay.
You put your money in, that's the antecedent. You press the button for your snack, that's the behavior. And then comes the consequence. Either you get your snack, which is a reinforcer, and makes you want to use the machine again, or you don't, which is a punisher and probably makes you think twice next time.
Yeah, it all boils down to the payoff. And that payoff could look pretty different depending on the person.
Absolutely. Let's dive into some real-life examples from the material.
Okay.
Remember Bill, who always struggled to finish his work on time? His boss started offering him overtime pay to get it done.
Okay.
Now, if Bill loves extra cash, that overtime pay is a positive reinforcer.
Yeah.
It's going to make him more likely to take on those extra hours.
But if Bill values his free time more than money, that overtime could be a punisher, right?
Absolutely.
He might start trying to avoid that situation altogether. It's like the same consequence can have opposite effects depending on the person.
Exactly. And then there's Jane, who always finishes her budget way ahead of schedule. Her manager started asking her to help others who were struggling. Now, if Jane loves to be helpful and get recognition for her efficiency, that's a positive reinforcer. He's going to keep being a rock star.
But if Jane starts feeling like she's constantly being taken advantage of, that same reward could quickly become a punisher.
Yes.
She might even start slowing down to avoid getting more work piled on her plate.
Exactly.
It's amazing how the same consequence can be seen so differently.
That's why understanding the individual is so important. And let's not forget Tom, the salesperson who proudly told his boss about closing a big deal. The boss, in response, just gave him a high five. For Tom, that simple act of recognition might be a powerful reinforcer enough to make him want to close even more deals.
It really highlights how seemingly small things can have a huge impact on behavior. You know, this is making me think, what are the things that motivate me? What makes me want to work harder, go the extra mile, and what makes me want to avoid certain tasks? It's pretty fascinating to think about.
It is. We often go through our days without really realizing how much those consequences shape our actions.
Yeah.
But there's another layer to this whole consequence thing that we need to explore. Motivating operations, or MOs.
Ooh, those sound interesting. What are MOs?
Think of them like the volume knob on a reinforcer.
Okay.
They're events that can temporarily change how powerful a reinforcer is at any given moment.
Okay, I think I get it. Like when I'm super hungry, even a simple sandwich feels like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
But when I'm not, it's just a sandwich.
Yeah.
So my hunger level is like the MO that's making the sandwich more or less rewarding.
You nailed it. Our source material dives into some great examples of this. If you've been working outside on a scorching hot day, suddenly a glass of ice water becomes the most amazing thing ever. That feeling of thirst is your MO, making the water way more reinforcing than it would be on a regular day.
So it's not just about the reinforcer itself. It's about how much the person values it at that specific moment.
Exactly. And this is where good leadership comes in.
Okay.
Great leaders know how to tap into those MOs and create situations where employees are super motivated to work for things they might not typically care about. They create a context where the reinforcers are highly valued and therefore more effective in driving those desired behaviors.
It's like creating that perfect storm of motivation. The source material mentioned a really cool example of this. A company that transports new cars wanted to encourage their drivers to deliver vehicles without any damage. Instead of a bonus, they gave drivers who achieved a perfect record a special Top Gun license plate.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
The license plate itself had zero monetary value. It was purely symbolic.
Yeah.
But because of the status and recognition it represented among the drivers, it became this incredibly powerful motivator.
It's amazing how they tapped into those underlying motivations. It wasn't about the physical license plate. It was about what it represented. Excellent skill being the best of the best.
Now think about your own work for a moment.
Okay.
Are there any Top Gun opportunities you could create for your clients or colleagues? What are the things they truly value? How can you align rewards with those values to unlock that incredible motivation?
That's a great question to think about. It's all about understanding the individual and what makes them tick. Speaking of which, I think it's important to note that what might be a reward for one person could be a punishment for another. Like that example of the company that threw a big banquet as a reward for perfect attendance. Some employees dreaded that banquet. For them, it was a negative consequence.
Oh, absolutely. You've hit on a crucial point. A consequence's effectiveness completely depends on the individual. What's a high five for one person might be utterly meaningless for another. It's about understanding individual values, preferences, and even past experiences.
So it's not about finding some universal best reward. It's about figuring out what works for each specific person.
Exactly. And that's something managers often get wrong. They tend to view consequences from the organization's perspective, thinking, this is a great reward, everyone should want this. But that's not how it works. That kind of thinking can lead to some pretty ineffective strategies.
You know, this reminds me of Nora, the programmer, who was super competitive.
Oh, yeah.
When she was working solo, that drive was fantastic. It pushed her to excel. But then she got promoted to supervisor. And suddenly her team's success started to feel like a punishment. She wasn't used to sharing the spotlight.
It's a classic example of how a strength in one context can become a weakness in another.
Right.
Her past experiences shaped how she viewed those consequences. It highlights just how important it is for managers to really understand the nuances of individual motivation.
It's not just about understanding the ABC model. It's about applying it with empathy and a deep understanding of each person.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now, before we wrap up this part of our dive, we need to talk about another crucial piece of the puzzle: timing. When it comes to consequences, timing is everything.
Oh, I have a feeling this is important. What do you mean by that?
It's like, you know how they say timing is everything?
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to consequences,
Right.
that couldn't be more true.
Okay.
For a consequence to be effective, it needs to be delivered right after the behavior happens.
Okay. So it's not just about what you do, but when you do it.
Yes.
So like if you wait too long to praise someone for a job well done, it loses its impact.
Exactly. The longer you wait, the weaker the connection becomes between the behavior and the consequence. It's like trying to teach a dog a trick hours after they did something good.
Yeah.
They're going to be totally confused about what you're rewarding them for.
So it's like delivering that consequence in real time, right when the action is fresh in everyone's mind.
Precisely. Let's go back to Ava, our chronic complainer.
Mm.
Her manager was actually reinforcing her complaining by giving her attention every time she did it.
Oh,
It was like he was rewarding her for being negative.
okay.
But then he shifted his approach.
Okay.
He started ignoring the complaining and only engaging with her when she was being productive.
Ah, so he was basically changing the consequence by changing his own behavior.
Exactly.
And it worked.
It did. Ava's complaining dropped dramatically and her productivity soared. It's a perfect example of how timing can completely change the game.
That's such a good reminder for us all to really pay attention to what we're reinforcing with our actions. I know I'm guilty of accidentally rewarding behaviors I don't want to see.
Oh, we've all been there. Now, before we move on, there's one more thing I think we need to unpack about consequences. The 4 specific types.
Okay.
We've talked about positive reinforcement, which is giving something good to increase a behavior, and negative reinforcement, which is taking away something bad to achieve the same result.
Right. So what are the other 2?
The 2 that often get a bad rap,
Okay.
punishment and penalty. Both aim to decrease a behavior, but they do it in different ways.
Okay. So tell me more about this punishment versus penalty thing. I think this is where a lot of people get confused.
It's a subtle but important difference. Punishment involves adding something unpleasant after a behavior to make it less likely to happen again.
Okay.
Like if an employee keeps showing up late, the manager might give them a written warning.
That makes sense. So the warning is like the punishment that's meant to discourage the tardiness?
Yeah,
It's like getting a timeout as a kid.
exactly. And then there's penalty, which is taking away something desirable after a behavior to decrease it.
Okay.
Imagine an employee who constantly misses deadlines. Their manager might take away their privilege of working from home. It's about removing a positive thing to motivate them to improve.
So punishment is adding a negative and penalty is taking away a positive.
No.
But both are meant to decrease a behavior. It's kind of like adding a chore to your to-do list versus losing your TV privileges for the night.
Great analogy. But here's the crucial thing. While both punishment and penalty can be effective in reducing unwanted behaviors, they don't always address the root cause of the problem.
Right? Like if an employee is missing deadlines because they haven't been trained properly or they're lacking resources, just punishing them isn't going to magically solve the issue. In fact, it might make things worse by creating resentment.
It's like trying to fix a leaky faucet by just mopping up the water. You're addressing the symptom, but not the actual problem. That's why it's so important to take a comprehensive approach, looking at the whole ABC sequence and figuring out what's really going on.
So before jumping to punishment or penalty, we need to ask ourselves, are there any skill deficits?
Right.
Are there any environmental factors making it tough for this person to succeed? Maybe they need more training or support.
You got it. As ABA professionals, we're all about helping people thrive, not just trying to control them. And sometimes that means going beyond the surface behavior and really understanding the individual's needs.
You know, thinking about all these types of consequences really underscores how powerful they are. It's almost like a universal law of behavior. Our actions are shaped by what happens afterward.
It's a fascinating insight, isn't it? It's at the core of what we do in ABA. Consequences are constantly shaping our behavior, influencing our choices, and even shaping our habits.
It's like this invisible hand guiding us towards some behaviors and steering us away from others.
Exactly. And this has huge implications for how we approach behavior change. It means we can't just rely on willpower or wishful thinking. We need to create environments where the consequences support the behaviors we want to see.
So we're setting people up for success by aligning their environment with their goals rather than just telling them what to do and hoping for the best.
Right on. And this applies everywhere, from personal habits to workplace dynamics to societal norms. If you want to change behavior, you have to change the consequences.
That's a powerful message. So if we want to create lasting positive change, we need to focus on reinforcing the behaviors we want to see more of.
You got it. Positive reinforcement is a game changer. And it's not about manipulating people. It's about creating environments where people naturally want to do the right things because they experience positive outcomes.
It's about making those desired behaviors feel good and rewarding so people naturally gravitate toward them.
Exactly. Punishment and penalty might have their place in some limited situations, but positive reinforcement is the most effective and ethical tool we have for creating lasting change. It's about empowering people to make good choices, not just trying to control them.
I love that focus on empowerment. You know, one of the things that struck me when I was reading through the material is how differently consequences can affect people. What might be a positive reinforcer for one person could be a total turnoff for someone else.
That's so true. Individual differences are at the heart of it all. We can't just assume everyone is going to react to a consequence the same way. What motivates one person might completely demotivate another. What one person finds rewarding, another might find punishing. That's why it's crucial to understand individual values, preferences, and even past experiences.
So there's no magic formula or one-size-fits-all approach. We really need to tailor our strategies to each person we're working with, right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that what works for one person might not work for another, and being willing to adjust our approach based on the individual's unique needs and responses.
You know, this takes me back to what we were discussing about motivating operations, or MOs. They play a huge role in how people perceive and respond to those consequences.
You're exactly right. Remember, those MOs can temporarily change the value of a reinforcer. For example, if you're sleep deprived, the chance to take a nap becomes incredibly appealing. But if you're well rested, it's not nearly as exciting.
It's like our internal state can make a huge difference in how we view those consequences.
Exactly. And this highlights the importance of being aware of any factors that might be influencing an individual's motivation at any given time. We need to be flexible and willing to adapt our approach, recognizing that what worked yesterday might not work today.
So it's about staying attuned to those individual needs and motivations. Now, we've talked about how important it is to deliver consequences immediately, but are there any other things to keep in mind about timing?
There is another fascinating aspect of timing. Doing nothing can also be a consequence. Sometimes ignoring a behavior can actually make it decrease or even disappear completely.
Wait, really? How can doing nothing have an effect on behavior?
It's all about what's reinforcing the behavior in the first place.
Okay.
Think about a child who's throwing a tantrum to get attention. If the parent ignores the tantrum they're taking away, that reinforcement, the attention and the tantrum might eventually stop.
So it's like cutting off the fuel supply.
Exactly. And this applies to adults too. Let's say an employee consistently goes above and beyond, but never gets any recognition for their effort. Eventually, they might stop trying so hard.
It's like their extra effort is being met with silence, which can be pretty demotivating.
Absolutely. It's like sending an unintentional message that their hard work doesn't matter. But on the flip side, doing nothing can sometimes accidentally reinforce behaviors we don't want to see.
Like if an employee keeps interrupting meetings with off-topic comments and the manager just ignores it.
Exactly. By not addressing the interruptions, the manager is basically allowing them to continue. It can create a chaotic and unproductive environment for everyone.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
We need to be super aware of the messages we're sending, even with our silence. It makes you realize that even doing nothing is a choice with consequences.
You hit the nail on the head. We always have to be intentional about how we respond to behavior because even doing nothing can have a huge impact. Sometimes the best strategy is to simply change how we're reacting. Like with Ava the complainer. Her manager changed everything by shifting his attention.
Right. Instead of focusing on the negative, he started reinforcing the positive. It's amazing how such a simple change can make a huge difference.
Yeah.
But we've been so focused on consequences. I think it's important to remember that antecedents are still an essential part of the ABC model.
You're absolutely right. Antecedents set the stage, providing context and cues for the behaviors. While consequences drive the change, antecedents help create the environment for success.
So it's like setting up a supportive environment that encourages those desired behaviors.
Exactly. This might involve providing clear instructions, using prompts and reminders, or even structuring the environment in a way that supports the target behavior. Think about a workplace that prioritizes safety.
Okay, so we're aiming for employees who consistently follow all the safety protocols.
Right. We could try to achieve that through punishment, reprimanding them for every violation. But a much better approach would be to create a culture of safety with clear guidelines, regular training, accessible safety equipment, and positive reinforcement for safe practices.
So we're proactively creating an environment where safety is the norm rather than just reacting to things when they go wrong.
Exactly. We're using those antecedents to make it easier for employees to do the right thing.
It's like paving the path toward those desired behaviors. And when we combine that smart antecedent management with well-timed and meaningful consequences, we're really cooking with gas.
Absolutely. It's a recipe for success.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the ADC model, let's talk about some key takeaways that our listeners can actually use in their work.
Sounds good to me. Where should we start?
Well, I think the most important thing is remembering that behavior is a function of its consequences. That's the golden rule of ABA.
Absolutely. It means that what happens after a behavior is what determines whether that behavior will happen again in the future.
So if we want to see more of a particular behavior, whether it's a client completing their chores or an employee meeting their deadlines, we need to make sure those behaviors are followed by some kind of positive reinforcement.
Exactly. And if we want to see less of a behavior, we can either introduce a punisher or remove a reinforcer. But it's important to remember what we talked about earlier. Punishment and penalty should always be considered very carefully and used ethically and ideally only as a last resort.
Right. It's always best to start with those positive reinforcement strategies and really explore all other options before going down the punishment or penalty road.
Now, another crucial takeaway is the importance of individualization. It's tempting to think there's some magic formula for motivating everyone, but that's just not how it works.
That's like assuming everyone likes the same flavor of ice cream.
Exactly. What motivates one person might demotivate another. What one person finds rewarding, another might find punishing. So we can't rely on a one-size-fits-all approach.
It all goes back to understanding those unique values, preferences, and motivations, and those pesky motivating operations. Remember, they can completely change the effectiveness of a reinforcer in an instant.
MOs definitely add a layer of complexity, but they also provide incredible insights into how to tailor our interventions for maximum effectiveness.
So it's about being a behavior detective, constantly observing and adapting our strategies as needed.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Now let's not forget about timing. For a consequence to pack a real punch, it needs to be delivered immediately after the behavior happens. Remember, the longer we wait, the weaker the connection becomes.
That's like that old saying, strike while the iron is hot.
Exactly. And this applies to both positive and negative consequences. If we want to reinforce a behavior, we need to do it right away. And if we need to address an undesirable behavior, we need to act promptly and consistently.
No procrastinating when it comes to consequences.
Yeah.
But we also talk about how sometimes doing nothing can be a consequence. That seems counterintuitive, but it's a really interesting concept.
It is. Sometimes ignoring a behavior can actually make it decrease, especially if that behavior is being driven by attention-seeking.
So it's like we're cutting off the supply of attention that was fueling that behavior.
Precisely. But, and this is important, sometimes ignoring a behavior can actually backfire and accidentally reinforce something we don't want to see. It all depends on what's maintaining that behavior in the first place.
It's like we have to be very deliberate with our silence. Even doing nothing is a choice with consequences.
Absolutely. We always need to be intentional about how we respond to behavior because even our inaction can send powerful messages. And sometimes the most effective approach is simply to change how we're reacting to a behavior, like in the case of Ava, the chronic complainer.
Her manager was able to decrease her complaining simply by changing when he interacted with her. Instead of giving her attention for complaining, he started focusing on her when she was being productive.
It's a fantastic illustration of how a simple shift in attention can have a big impact on behavior. It really highlights the importance of being strategic with our reinforcement.
It's like we're shaping behavior by being mindful of what we're paying attention to, both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And while we've spent a lot of time talking about consequences, remember that antecedents also play a critical role. They set the stage for those behaviors to occur.
So we're not just reacting to behavior, we're proactively creating conditions that encourage positive change.
Precisely. We can do this by providing clear instructions, offering prompts and reminders, and structuring the environment to support the desired behaviors. Think back to that workplace safety example. Instead of relying on punishment for violations, we can create a safety-first culture through clear guidelines, regular training, accessible safety equipment, and positive reinforcement for following those protocols.
It's like we're building a safety net rather than just waiting for accidents to happen and then scolding people.
Exactly. It's about setting people up for success. And when we combine that effective antecedent management with those well-timed and meaningful consequences, we create a powerful system for change.
It's like we're creating a recipe for success, combining the right ingredients in the right way to get the results we want. But the beauty of the ABC model is that it's not just for ABA professionals.
You're so right. This is a tool anyone can use, whether you're a parent, a teacher, a manager, or simply someone who wants to understand and improve your own habits and routines. The ABC model can help.
It's a framework for understanding why we do the things we do and how we can change those things if we want to.
So as you go about your day, I encourage you to start noticing those ABCs in action. Pay attention to what triggers certain behaviors, observe what happens afterward, and see if you can start to identify some patterns.
It's like becoming a behavior detective. With practice, you'll start to see the world in a whole new way. a way that empowers you to understand and shape behavior in meaningful ways.
This has been such an engaging discussion on the ABCs of behavior. It's amazing how such a seemingly simple model can unlock so much understanding.
And that wraps up another insightful episode of ADA Chapter Chat. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the ABC model. Until next time, keep those ABCs in mind, and remember, behavior is a function of its consequences.